Thanks, Adrian. And I'm not Chris Benedetti. I know in the panel or the program it said Chris. I play him on TV sometimes, so he's asked me to step in this morning to chair this distinguished panel. And I know it will be a very good, very interesting conversation, and following up on all the discussions and presentations that we had yesterday. As Adrian said, I think there is a buzz between the sectors, between renewables and mining, about the potential for the collaboration for both sectors. And while more than a few companies have taken a serious interest in incorporating renewables into their operations, and renewable companies looking at the mining sector, it's continuing to. There still are challenges. There are still disconnects. There still are kind of different languages between the two sectors, I think. And while mining companies' interest in utilizing renewables has historically been, from an environmental or public relations perspective, I think increasingly market conditions have changed that, and there's a view of this energy from a more economic angle. For renewables, the opportunity to diversify and find additional deployment opportunities as we become, from a utilities perspective, a mature market. This is an emerging market for renewables that increasingly is attractive. Current pressures on the mining sector are driving increased interest in cost savings and power security advantages that renewables can provide to mining operations. And right now, I think there's a global opportunity for the mining and renewable sectors to work together to drive affordable, sustainable, and reliable power solutions for the mining industry. But it requires a better collaboration and a better understanding between the two industries. So today, as I said, we have a distinguished panel representing the two sectors to discuss how we can start to build those bridges, close those gaps between the two sectors, and accelerate the uptake of new power options for mines, and accelerate the development of new mines and new investment. Please join me in welcoming our panel. We have Benoit LaSalle. He's President and CEO of Windiga Energy. Benoit is a fellow chartered accountant, a member of the Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants, and holds a commerce degree and MBA. In 1980, he founded Grew LaSalle and Associates, a consultant chartered accountants firm. He's founded a number of different organizations. He's a former chairman of the Board of Plan International, one of Canada's leading non-government organizations. And today he's the president and CEO of Windiga Energy Inc., a Canadian-based independent power producer focused on renewable energy assets in West Africa. He's the chairman of Algold Resources, and which has assets in Mauritania and Burkina Faso, and he's chairman of Sama Resources. He's a very busy man. And he's chairman of the Canadian Council on Africa. As well, we have Mike Winship, president-elect of the Canadian Institute of Mining, Metallurgy, and Petroleum, and director of Rubicon Metals. Michael was appointed to the role of president and CEO on an interim basis in October 2015. Prior to his appointment, Michael has been a director of the company since 2011. He has over 30 years' experience in mine development, operations, and corporate business. He's been involved in 20 mines in diverse working jurisdictions, including Northern Canada and the Sudbury Basin. He is the president and CEO of Orvana Mineral Corp., COO of Quadra FNX Mining, and prior to its acquisition by KGHM. He's held executive positions with Hudbay Minerals, PT International Nickel, and Vale Inco. Prior to Vale Inco, Michael was the general manager of several mines in Placer Dome operations, and he holds a bachelor's degree in mining and engineering from McGill University. Bill Gould is the Chief Technology Officer for Solar Reserve, and brings more than 40 years of technical experience in the ever-evolving solar sector. His experience broadly spans the areas of engineering, procurement, construction of power plants, and power-related systems. And for the last 12 years, he's focused and dedicated his energies to the solar sector. He served as a project manager for one of the largest demonstration facilities, thermal power facilities, and is continuing to deploy move forward the solar thermal market. He's done extensive feasibility work, design, construction, cost estimates, and financial due diligence in Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. He holds a Bachelor of Science and Master's of Science degrees in Mechanical Engineering from Brigham Young University, and is a licensed professional engineer in several states. So welcome to our distinguished panel. So gentlemen, the cost of renewables is becoming more competitive, and in remote locations where grid power is simply not available, renewables are viable options. In other areas where grid electricity is available, the likelihood of microgrids or remote installations is less common. We heard yesterday from the Minister of Energy in BC, where majority of their facilities are grid connected. Considering the diversity of locations, how do renewables fit in the locations and dynamics of the sectors? How do renewables fit with the evolving energy demands of the global mining sector? Maybe we'll start with Benoit, and then we can.
In theory, it fits extremely well. In theory. In practice, the mining sector goes from boom to bust very quickly. And in today's environment, when all the mining companies, you saw yesterday Tech Cominco announcing $2 billion write-offs, Vale, the same thing, they're being judged, the CEOs are being judged on Capex utilization, on OPEX, on reduction of OPEX. And then once you have a renewable strategy in place, and I'm sure Steve from IAMGOLD, and because we all operate in the same environment, looked into it, it's compelling. From 2008 to 2012, we were all doing it. I am currently building a 20 megawatt solar power plant for one of our mine, which is fantastic, but I had to structure that outside the mining company, because our mining company could not take the Capex, because we're based in the mining company, we're valued on return on capital. And so you've got a mining company that has an 8-year mine life and 14 months payback on the capital deployed for mining, and then you have the solar that's got a 25-year mine life and many years of payback. And so the CEO of the mining company is saying, I don't want that on my books. And so you really have to structure it differently. So in good times, there's a lot of good thinking, and it makes a lot, and it does make sense. Economically, it makes sense, because in Africa, where we operate, the cost of energy is about 35 cents per kilowatt hour on fuel, and it's 18 cents with solar. So that makes sense. But the Capex needed to get there cannot go on the balance sheet of the mining company. So then it's got to go on the balance sheet of an IPP. That's why we created Windiga Energy, which is an IPP company. And then we can talk about financing later on, but then you're financing a 25-year project with an 8-year mine life, and then you have a problem. So, but at the end of the day, it makes sense. It will go this way, and we'll talk about it further, but it will go this way. It has to go this way. But depending on the mining cycles, and today it's as bad as we've seen it in many, many, many years. So it's a little bit more difficult, but it will go there for sure, due to the fact that renewable is now cheaper, really cheaper than fuel, and fuel is really what drives mining. Because in Canada, we are on the grid, and in the United States, we are on the grid, but most of other countries, you're not on the grid, because when your ball mill goes down because you have a power failure and you need 8 days to restart that thing, I can tell you, you don't go on the grid. So you have your own gen sets, and even if you're on the grid, it's for everything else but for the ball mill or for the plant, because the plant needs to be on very, very reliable energy source, and hence we have a backup system.
Bill, some thoughts?
Yes. Mining customers have a very different market than our traditional utility customers. With utilities, there's a perpetual demand. It's statutory. The profit is established. It's constant. And the planning horizons can be 30 or 40 years. As you know, in the mining industry, the fluctuating commodity prices give a much more challenging forecasting situation for the mining companies. That notwithstanding, the price gap now, as was just mentioned, renewables can be cheaper than fossil sources, particularly in some environments where you have remoteness of location. We are talking to a lot of mines in Western Australia where they have to truck diesel hundreds of kilometers, and then the opportunity cost becomes over 30 cents US per kilowatt hour. Well, you can do renewables far less, somewhere in the 15 to 20 cent range, and so there's a profit incentive to go with renewables. Still, you have to look at the tenure of the financing, and you have to balance out, okay, do I have a contract for power purchase for 10, 15 years, and then a merchant tail to the financing of the power plant going forward? I think the primary drivers of interest to mines would be eliminating fuel price escalation risk. We have wonderfully low oil costs right now. Nobody believes it's going to stay low. We don't know when it's going to come back, but the costs of diesel and other fossil fuels is surely going to increase, making life more challenging. Although the Capex, high Capex price at the front end is challenging, at least it establishes your future, and you have no escalation risks if you put in the solar and wind and other resources.
Michael?
Dave, I think your question was about the role of renewables with mines on a global basis, and I guess I've worked on all the continents except for Antarctica on projects in mining, and I guess the first sort of general rule of thumb you alluded to was grid or no grid, and typically mining's a capital-intensive business, and if you're able to link onto the grid, typically that's the first place you're going to go. So I think after that, it's a question of where you're in a more remote situation, like Benoit has alluded to, is where is the role for renewables there? Now, I guess the first type of renewable I'd think about is what Chief Day alluded to. He used the word hydro interchangeably with power for remote communities, and certainly in a country like Canada, where we're blessed with a lot of water, we've seen the tech of the world, using the Kootenay power and building quite a good sustainable business. In Indonesia, I had the experience of building a 135 megawatt power dam. Is not only beneficial for long-term mining of nickel laterites, but also bringing power to the indigenous communities or the nearby communities there. So that's certainly one renewable that I think we still need to look at when we're building our mines where there are river water resources. The other is solar, and certainly again having experience in the Atacama Desert in Nevada, go where the sun is, and of course we have sun in Canada and places, but of course the solar benefits I think diminish as you go further north. But I was interested to read about Teck again putting in a solar farm at the Kimberley mine where I started my mining career, and so there's obviously some potential with that in different parts of Canada. And wind energy, where I was last mining in Spain, we had wind generation running along the ridge, not ours, the government, but down in the valley again was a hydro plant. So you're able to deal with that issue of storage that I think is one of the critical things that we'll probably come to later this morning.
Thank you. I mean, we've heard a lot, and you've all touched on it, in terms of the biggest impediments to incorporating renewables into a mining operation. And historically, I think those have touched on, technological issues and financial challenges. I think, and I think you've all addressed that, the reliability and effectiveness of renewables in the operations makes sense. From a, you can wrap your head around that. Integrating solar or integrating wind or hydro, you'll have the power you need in a well-designed system. Cost in certain places makes sense, and you've all mentioned that. I think the issue is that remains to be kind of addressed is a cultural one. And Benoit, you mentioned it in your first comments that you're a mining company. You're not an energy company. So the capex of an energy project, putting that on the books of the mining company, is a challenge. While energy is a big input into your operations, that's an operating expense, not a capital expense. And getting an investment committee's head or an executive committee's head around the fact that you're going to put that much money on their books to get this operation off the design table and into operations is a challenge. How do you address that? How do you, and we hear this, we hear this in the manufacturing sector as well. While we have this $1 million energy bill we pay every month, it's easier to pay that than to go to the board and get the capital to build a plant, even though it makes sense economically and even though it makes sense technologically. So how do you bridge that cultural gap between being a mining company, but also needing to morph or transition into also being an energy company? And I'll go down maybe Mike, we'll start with you and come this way this time.
Okay. No, I hear your question about there being a cultural gap, but when I was considering that, I was first starting to think of where's the commonality, and at a high level, both the mining companies and the renewable folks are in the business of harvesting natural resources. The mines harvesting minerals, the wind folks harvesting the wind energy, hydro, the power from the river, and solar, harvesting the energy of the sun. So that I think there's common ground at a high level, and I don't know that it's so much maybe a cultural issue that's keeping it apart. I think more maybe, as you're alluding to, Dave, it's more around the economic one, and I think certainly both industries are capital intensive at the start, and then have sort of very long payoffs typically. So that is more of the challenge. And although you preface your question between the renewable group and the mining group, I'd say a strong stool has 4 legs, and 2 other critical legs in this discussion is one is the government, and the other is the indigenous people, or the First Nations. And that's where I think we have to look at it sort of as a 4-way partnership, and consider how you can have a sustainable solution with those 4 groups. And that's where I think the government, for example, can work to bridge some of those gaps in terms of looking at regulatory framework, or Chief Day was talking the national situation. The provincial situation is quite challenging. There's a lot of times I wanted to run an extension cord over the line from Red Lake into Manitoba to get their power, or from Detour across to Quebec. So, that's certainly a renewable energy sources that we have, again, coming back to hydro, where the government has a role to play, and certainly on the First Nations basis, linking in these isolated communities that don't have power. Thinking of the Ring of Fire, for example, where we'd have to cooperate with that 4-legged stool to make that a go.
Specific to your question about CapEx, we do quite a bit of development work in Chile with the mines in the northern regions, and although we offer to them the opportunity to participate in the equity, the more popular role is a power purchase agreement. And now that still involves, talking to the board about a long-term commitment, but all our projects are bank financed or majority bank financed with some potential equity participation by the mines, but primarily it forms power purchase agreements that are financed by the banks. Now, in order to do that, you have to present to the mining company a compelling financial justification. It has to be cheaper. It has to eliminate other risks. And then you talk to the board about, okay, I do have a long-term commitment, but I am eliminating fuel price escalation risk, and that is sometimes attractive.
Benoit?
We should know that it's a very competitive environment, the power environment, and so now the fuel companies actually take the capex on their balance sheet. So we're building mines in Africa, and the oil companies put the storage tanks up, put the distribution system in place for us, buy the 10 trucks a day that we need. We're buying 3 million liters of fuel per month per mine. They bring in the trucks, they put the storage, so they take all the capex. So you go to your board and you're saying, I've got whoever, ABC, taking all the capex, or I can put 50 million on my balance sheet with a 25-year amortization. It doesn't fly. It doesn't fly. So the only way I was able to push that through, which still is my company, but you still have to push it through your board, is I used the CSR approach. I said, this is pure CSR. I said, because you're not going to bring fuel in, burn more fuel, and do rural electrification. You're not going to do that. I mean, if you do, it's very costly and very expensive. And once the mine is gone, there's no more power, which is terrible. So, and a mine has 10, 15, 20 years mine life, which is very short. So by coming in with the solar power project, we said, okay, if we'll structure it outside, so off balance sheet, but we will do as well 27 villages or 20 villages per year over the next 5 years with rural electrification. That rings something to the board, to the government, to management, and now they all buy in. Because in mining, it's not a popular sport, mining. It's not baseball, I can tell you this. So you need buy-in from the population. And buying from the population comes from, yes, we all did, wells and school, but you need to go further than that now. This is kind of a given now that you will do that. And electrification is the new thing in developing countries and in remote areas. And communication is electrification is the new thing because they have communication, because they're on Facebook, because they have cell phones. So by bringing in through the CSR door, it did work for us, and it got us a lot of mileage. We got financing, we got subsidized financing because we came in through that back door. But it's for the mine, it's fantastic as well. So you need to position it in a way where it's a win-win rather than a cost. Because if it's a cost, the analysts kill you. If you're a public company, they'll write about it. They won't like it. It's too much capex. There's no need. It just doesn't fly. So you need to put it through another way. And I think, sadly, but I think which is the CSR way is the right way to position it currently, and then it makes sense.
Well, you mentioned PPAs, and from the renewable side, I mean that is the kind of the sacred cow, the golden egg is to secure a long-term PPA, and typically, I mean here in Canada, in most markets, that is the holy grail, is to secure a long-term, typically government-backed PPA that ultimately, is worth the paper, and you can go to the bank, and that's financeable. But typically, those are long, amortization periods, 20, 25 years on a wind or solar facility, longer on a hydro asset. How do you again, from a renewable perspective, where that has been the focus for the last 20 years or more here, how do you, like, from a renewables perspective, how do you shift, and what are some of the dynamics or creativity that has to come into from a renewable perspective as you approach a mine who doesn't have potentially that long a tenure, that long an amortization period? How do you marry those up to not necessarily sell it to the mining board, but to sell it to your investors or to the renewable company investment committee that's making this decision as well?
Well, first of all, we're not large enough to take these billion-dollar projects on balance sheet. So all of these large projects go to a club of banks, and you have to satisfy, first of all, the lender's technical advisor that the risk reduction is real and that the technology can stand on its own. And then, of course, the thing that you mentioned is you have to be able to deal with a different tenure of financing versus the mine life. That automatically says some customers won't be available to us. If there's an 8-year mine life, we won't even try. But if you have a large mining concern, multi-decade mine, like some of those in Chile, for example, and elsewhere, you can justify something. Even with these long-tenured mines, we're finding that the culture of the mining company is to accept shorter-term commitments. Mine might be projected to live for 50 years, but the culture in the boardroom is take a shorter-term financing obligation, 10, 15, 20. In some of our projects, we will structure a two-part arrangement where we have a club of banks with a tenure that matches what the mining company can handle, 15, maybe 20 years. And of course, we try to get the amortization as long as possible to reduce the cost, to make the cost attractive to the mining company. So in some of those cases, you have a firm commitment from the mine, and then you have a merchant tail, where our board has to accept the risk that 20 years from now, we will be able to find a customer.
Michael, do you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I'm listening with quite a bit of interest. Last night I got in from Red Lake, so wearing my Rubicon Minerals hat, certainly one of the key things we're trying to do is get up into commercial production, and we're maybe one of 2 mining companies in Canada that's trying to build a gold mine at the stage we're at. One has quite a bit deeper pockets, but I'm sure faces those same issues of that upfront capital. So, I mean, yesterday we were looking at leasing options, just which we know isn't necessarily cost effective on some of the equipment we're buying, but again, to get us over that hurdle to the production. I guess one of my other thoughts is, again, that the government used to be in this business of putting infrastructure in, or Pearson roads to the north. Maybe Quebec's one of the few exceptions now that thinks of doing that. Ontario talks about it a lot. But another group is the financial community, and say the Brookfields that have infrastructure funds and that are taking on some of these long-term infrastructure projects. So there could perhaps be a 3-way partnership there in terms of where you have the major capital investment and you need it amortized over a longer period, that you can form some solution, again, PPA type approach.
Thank you. I mean, it really is a delicate balancing act. It's a tap dance between competing interests, and I have lots more questions, but I know that this audience out here is not shy. So I'm going to ask if there are any questions from the audience. There are microphones, so please just put up your hand, and we'll get a microphone to you. This is a question right here.
Thank you.
It's the largest microphone I've ever seen.
My name is John Okoro. I work with Benny Group in France. My question for Benoit. You spoke about your project in Ghana. I'd like to know more about it. Is it for a mine? Is it with a PPA with a mine, or is it a rural electrification project?
The project I referred to, the 20 megawatt, was in Burkina Faso, but we also have a 20 megawatt PPA sign in Ghana, and it's which should be in construction next year, and that one is for the grid. So it's northern Ghana, 10 kilometers from the border with Burkina, and it's as you know, Ghana have divided the country into 5 regions, and they're putting solar projects in one project in each of the region. And so in Ghana, we have a 20 megawatt project in the final phase of development. The one in Burkina, and I'll just go back to the discussion on PPAs because it's critical, is though we are building 20 megawatts 7 kilometers from our mine, we're going through the grid. So we did sign a 25-year PPA because that was the only way we could get proper funding. So, and governments these days understand that, so they were willing to take the risk that, yeah, their number one client will be the mine for 8 to 10 years, but they say, look, our demand is increasing so quickly, and that in 10 years, if the mine is not, requiring another 10 or 12 megawatts, it doesn't matter, we'll be able to distribute that on the grid. So they were willing to commit to a 25-year PPA, which we got signed, and we were able to put the funding together, and that is allowing us to build a 20 megawatt, which will serve the mine to start with, but will also serve regional electrification. So the route of the PPA for a mining company is absolutely, I think, the way to go, and through, if the government is willing to take a PPA, then you're not stuck with this dual amortization period, which is not compatible. So it's how we were able to make it work. And because of Africa, where there's so much sun and such a great need for electricity and for renewable, by showing in West Africa that we can build a 20 megawatt, then they all came along. Mali, Ghana, Mauritania, Burkina, Cote d'Ivoire. They're all looking at building these projects because it's the future, and solar is abundant in that part of the world.
Excellent.
Continuing on that, Benoit, can you hear? Yes. On your PPAs that you have, do you have a regulatory framework around it where you can get rate increases based on return on and of capital investment, required investment? Do you have escalators in there? Because that becomes a big issue later on. Environmental rules change. Is there a regime around it that can address that on your behalf?
Yeah, well, that's why it took us 6 years to sign the PPA. And because we kind of, when I started the energy company, it was really a CSR initiative from our mining group. Because we're operating gold mines in Africa, and we have all kinds of other projects in development. So we said we're going to channel money back into CSR through our charity, but also through an energy company where we're going to accompany the government in putting in the legislation. So it took 6 years to work with the government in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Senegal, in Mauritania, to bring them along and change the legislation so that their legislation allows IPP to work in the country. So now we're well done. It's very well structured. We're getting funding from the IFC, so you know that they're going to look into every aspect of the PPA, and they're satisfied that we have the investment framework and the structure that is compelling. But we went with the government and we gave them our model. We said, look, this is the model. This is the cost of capital. This is the cost of debt. This is the cost of the EPC contractor. And we said, this is this is what it is. And it's like it's an IPP company, but structured with the philosophy of a PPP. So we're giving them all the information, and they like that, and they're willing to commit, because they saw all the numbers, and they're getting all kinds of programs, training programs, through that PPA. So it's so yes. To a very long answer to a short question, the answer is yes. The framework is in place.
I mean, it really does come down to creativity and flexibility and thinking beyond just your core business, right? You're not just an energy company, you're not just a mining company, you're also a lobbyist, you're a policy developer. I mean, it's wearing multiple hats to make this work, and I think it really comes down to, that dynamicism, that creativity. That's really important. I see Adrienne at the podium, so
Yeah.
she's going to cut us off. But
Yeah.
I really want to thank all of you. I know there are probably additional questions. I'm assuming all of you are here for the day. So if you do have questions, find these gentlemen in the room or in the lobby, and I'm sure they'll be happy to talk more.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks, guys.